There are thousands of Pokemon fan games and ROM hacks, some good, some mediocre, and a few admittedly bad. But every once in a while, there's a project that takes the community by storm. A project so popular that almost every Pokemon YouTuber will talk about it, even the ones that only touch official content. Of course, in this case, I'm talking about Pokemon Xenoverse, a completed and high quality fan game that in 2021 seemingly came out of nowhere. It's an incredibly well praised project, even being called a masterpiece by some. But I was skeptical. You see, if you're unfamiliar with the nature of the fan game community, every new and completed project goes through a phase of being called the best fan game ever, and then forgotten about a month later when the community moves on to the next best fan game ever. Now, I'm a little late to the party. I was super busy with my personal life when Xenoverse came out, and really only dedicated my free time to playing updates to fan games I was already familiar with and working on my own. But now that I have an excuse to make a video about it, I can finally jump in. But before I start, I want to say that while all my opinions in this video will be honest, this is no way meant to be disrespectful to any of the game's developers. I understand the effort and willpower it takes to spend multiple years of your life working on a game for free. But without further ado, was Pokemon Xenoverse really that good? I figured I'd start with the gameplay, because let's be honest, gameplay is king. A bad story with good gameplay can still be fun, but a good story with bad gameplay will just leave something to be desired. For the most part, Xenoverse's gameplay was pretty standard to Game Freaks. You build a team of Pokemon, take on 8 gym leaders, and deal with whatever obstacles stand in the way. But of course, the game does provide you with a plethora of new Pokemon and forms, which I decided to only use for my team. But I'll talk more about the Pokédex later. The map is definitely linear, but not in the same way that Galar from Sword and Shield felt. Sure, you're walking one way for most of the story, but the farther you go, the farther you actually feel from where you started. A big thing about the exploration that I did want to compliment were the Porygon stations. Paying only 500 to heal my team, or access the PC in the middle of a route, was very nice. I do, however, really want to talk about the difficulty. The bosses in Xenoverse are very inconsistent. Sure, there are a lot of fights that on paper are pretty challenging, but that's not really what I'm talking about. Any of this game's bosses can be really easy or really hard, and that's all because of the horrendous battle AI. The AI in this game, from my experience, will literally just pick random moves. So in some cases, the gym leader's ace could 1 or 2 shot your entire team while outspeeding them, or spam focus energy 6 times, which happened more often than you think. This can, however, work against you. The randomness made it pretty difficult to predict what the enemy was going to do, and caused me to retry a lot of battles, even if I planned perfectly. Eventually, this inconsistency did go away once my main team was fully evolved and diverse enough in typing and movesets. I could handle almost any threat without a problem. The last battle-related thing I want to talk about is a certain unwinnable fight before the second gym. Unwinnable battles in fan games are somewhat controversial, but in a few cases those battles either happen super early before you have any Pokemon, have some cheesy but accessible way to beat it, or the game offers a speed up button to make it go faster. Xenoverse has none of these. It's just 2 Pawniards that take no damage from almost any source, and are coded to one-shot almost anything. While I've seen a single case of someone winning this fight, it really felt like the devs just wanted to make you watch your entire team die. Call me petty for singling out one battle, but I still thought it was extremely dumb, even if it was for the sake of the story. Overall, the gameplay wasn't bad, but it definitely wasn't mind-blowing. Alright, I'm going to split the graphical review into 3 points, starting with the character and splash arts. The characters were pretty well done. There were a few designs I didn't like, but overall, most of them were pretty unique. The splash arts, however, which are the pictures that will flash on the screen during cutscenes, were probably the second most impressive part of the entire game. Other than how well drawn they were, they did an incredible job of bringing the story to life and making you feel like you were really there, is what I would have said if it weren't for the overworld art style. The part of Xenoverse I dislike the most is the overworld. I just don't think it fits, and let me explain. None of the characters have any animations to complement the new art style, and their bobblehead designs, combined with their lifeless look, kind of took away from the story during important cutscenes. While walking through routes, especially in the early game, a lot of the different tiles just don't feel like they fit together. Back to the splash arts, there are so many cases where you'll have a very cool piece of artwork right before a boss battle, before it returns to something completely different. Like, how is this the same area? Okay, let's talk about what's obviously the most impressive part about Xenoverse, and that's the animated sprites. They look great, and for how much effort clearly went into them, I'm actually glad I only have positive things to say about them. Like, they had to sprite each individual frame in said animation for every new Pokemon or form they introduced. I can't not compliment the effort there. Although, even if the sprites are cool to look at in battle, they aren't complemented well by the move animations. Each type had about 2, maybe 3 animations. They got stale really quickly, and by the time I reached the 3rd gym, I kinda just turned them off to save time. Alright, so before I move on to my final point, I wanted to quickly talk about what I found to be the best part about Xenoverse, and that's the new Pokemon and forms. They're all incredibly well designed, some of them not even feeling like real Pokemon, but honestly in a good way. The starters being able to change forms rather than just permanently evolving as you progress was a very unique and cool system to use. While I'm a fan of the cute party sprites in most Pokemon games, having art for every single new form and Pokemon was a lot cooler, and it really allowed you to gain another perspective of them. The only thing about the Pokemon I really have to complain about is a lot of the evolution methods. Very many of the new Pokemon had to evolve from an item that could be either obtained from one of 2 ways. Either a 1% chance for the wild Pokemon to be holding it, or obtaining it from a pretty late game area. This made a lot of them feel pretty unusable in the mid game, as your unevolved 300 base stat total Pokemon couldn't really compete with a lot of the bosses. But overall, they were all awesome, and the ones I used on my team didn't disappoint. But finally, it's time to talk about the story. And oh boy, I'm probably going to piss some people off here. Before that, I do want to say that I won't be covering any spoilers, or at least any in detail, that should affect your future enjoyment of the game if you happen to have not played it yet. Like I said at the beginning, most of Xenoverse's story felt very game freaky, if that makes sense. You leave home with your starter Pokemon, take on some gym leaders, and deal with rivals and antagonist groups along the way. But the part that separates it from a mainline Pokemon title is how incredibly dumbed down the writing felt. The game will spoon-feed the crap out of information to the reader, leaving very little personal foreshadowing to be had, or that rewarding feeling you would get when the little details you picked up early on would be eventually explored in the story. As for the characters, the gym leaders would have some part in the story and were somewhat well written and unique from each other, but mostly got sidelined after you obtained their badge, which wasn't a big deal. I'm not expecting this to be another Reborn level story, but the characters that actually continued to return in the story were incredibly dull. 90% of them were one of the following. The good guy characters telling you good job and that you're such an awesome trainer. The bad guy characters consistently trying to explain that they're the bad guys, even though it's pretty obvious. And the overly edgy rival that calls you a noob and tells you how much you suck, despite the fact that you just effortlessly one-shot his only team member. Okay, that last one was just one character, but I despised reading anything that came out of his mouth. Now, of course, there were a few moments in the story that I did enjoy, specifically the train sequence after the 5th gym leader, but even the parts I did like weren't able to really make up for the stuff that I didn't. The plot eventually just got to a point where it felt like a chore to progress through, and I promise I did try my best to enjoy it. But at the end of the day, it felt like it was written for people with the lowest level of reading comprehension. Before I close things out, I know many of you that have made it this far are probably ready to scream at me in the comments for nitpicking a Pokemon fan game, but I have two things to say, and I hope you'll hear them out. First of all, I sincerely believe that all of my complaints were about things that genuinely impacted the experience, and not silly things that I could ignore, like random bugs, small issues, or nitpicks. Second of all, I've spent the last 3 years watching this game get universally and highly praised by almost every single Pokemon player and YouTuber that put their hands on it. When you tell me that the story, graphics, and gameplay are exceptional, I'm going to go into it with incredibly high expectations, and I'm going to voice my criticism when those expectations aren't met. But of course, I understand that this is still a free Pokemon fan game, being made by people who most likely developed it under other full-time responsibilities. So even with my complaints, I still hold the creators in high regard, and I still think that this game is worth playing and forming your own opinions of. I'm personally going to score my enjoyment of this game with a 7 out of 10. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more reviews of other fan projects or ROM hacks, then be sure to let me know. I hope you have a nice day, and goodbye!